Hello and welcome to this online and digital classroom. My name is Roshan, your geography teacher, and you are here in this channel, Learn Geography with Roshan. So, we were discussing about hydrosphere. We have discussed ocean currents and the factors that affect the ocean currents, different examples of ocean currents in Atlantic Ocean and in Pacific Ocean, their effects. In this video, we shall discuss about the tides and the types of tides and the effects of tides. Tides. The alternate rise and fall in the surface of the ocean in a regular rhythmic motion twice in about 24 hours. So what is the definition of tides? Underline this one. The alternate rise and fall in the surface water of the ocean in a regular rhythmic motion twice in about 24 hours. It occurs twice in about 24 hours, resulting from the gravitational attraction that is exerted upon the earth by the sun and the moon is known as tides. So, the gravitational pull of moon and sun results the occurrence of tides. The tidal producing force of the moon is twice than that of the sun. In other words, tides are forced by the gravitational attraction of the moon and the centrifugal force of the earth and the moon. So more, the magnitude or intensity of the tides are due to the gravitational force or attraction of the moon and by the centrifugal force of the earth and of the moon. The causes of tides. What causes the occurrence of tides? What causes the formation of tides? Let's see. There are 3 points that cause the formation of tides. The first one is gravitational force. Tides are caused by the influence of moon on the earth. The gravitational pull of moon is more on earth because of its proximity to the earth. So, the gravity of moon is more as compared to the gravity of the sun because the moon is closer than the sun. So, what happens? The gravitational pull or gravitational attraction is more of the moon towards the ocean water that is present on the earth. The sun being too far away exerts some pull on the earth due to its great mass, but it is much less as compared to moon. People living on the seashore can observe the connection between the phases of moon and tides. So, the sun, due to its far distance, it cannot exert more as compared to the moon. The second point is that influence of the moon. The earth is pulled towards the moon more than the water at H1. Therefore, water lags behind and rises at H1. You can see the diagram that is given on the textbook. H1 and H1, you can see the pull of the water is exerted, forming high tide. The moon's pull causes water to be drawn from L1 and L2. Therefore, low tides occurs there. So, when you compare H1 and L1, in the H1 and H2, both the sides, the ocean water is pulled because of the gravitational force of moon, and in L1 and L2 is not pulled by the gravitational force of moon because they are not in the right angle. Third point is that the rotation of the earth. The rotation of the earth results in every meridian coming into the position of 2 high tides and 2 low tides nearly every 24 hours. So, the rotation of the earth causes 2 high tides and 2 low tides in each of the meridians. Since moon travels in its orbits in the same direction as the earth is rotating, it makes about 24 hours, 52 minutes or 1 lunar day for the sequence of 2 high and 2 low tides to be completed. So what happens as the rotation of earth and the revolution of moon around the earth is the same speed. So due to that, what happens? The One lunar day for the sequence of 2 high and 2 low tides are completed of the moon. Now let's see about the magnitude of tides, how much intensity of tides that occur. The tides are of different magnitude and their height in the open area differs to that of the coastal areas. In the open area, the difference in height between high, that is spring tide, and the low tides is known as neap tide, may be 1.5 meter. In the open sea, it is very less. The height of the tides are very less, half meter. But in shallow marginal sea, that is coming contact with the sea, coastal areas or the configuration of the coastal lines, it can increase to about 10 meters and in some of the estuaries up to 12 meters. On an average, tide rises to about 4 meters. So average tide rise about 4 meters, but the coastal areas, the shallow marginal sea, the tides can rise up to 10 meter or up to 12 meters nearby the estuaries. So there are two types of tides, that is the first one is spring tide and the second one is neap tide. Spring tide is termed as when the sun, moon and earth is in a straight line. So they have the more gravity, so that is known as spring tide or high tide. And contrary to that, neap tide means when sun, moon and earth is not in the straight line, and in that positions the tides are very low. So that's why it is known as neap tide or low tides. Now let's discuss about spring tide. When the sun, earth and moon are in a straight line, as they are at a full moon and new moon, the gravitational force is at its greatest because of the combined force of sun, moon as they are pulling together. So the sun, moon and earth are in the straight line. So due to the gravitational force, when they are straight line, the gravity of the moon and sun will be more. At this time, the high tide is very high. At this time, the high tide is very high and low tide is very low. Those types of tides are called spring tides. You can see the diagram, a very important diagram, often asked in the exam. Learn to draw the diagram, spring tide. Now let's discuss about the neap tide. When the sun, earth and moon are not in a straight line, opposite of that, the sun, moon and earth are not in a straight line. The sun and moon are not exerting combined force. The sun and moon are not exerting combined force. They are not pulling together and the gravitational pull is very less, much less. At half moon, that is when the sun and moon are pulling at right angles, the force exerted is at its least and the difference between high and low tide is not large. These tides are called neap tides. So in the half moon, the moon and the sun is not straight to the earth. So what happens? Due to that, the gravity of the sun and moon is very less. So they will be occurring as the low tides. See the diagram and learn to draw it. The fact file, tide means the regular and rhythmic rise and fall of ocean water. What is meaning of tidal range? The difference between high tide and low tide is called the tidal range of or amplitude. Generally it is 1 to 3 meters but differs daily as per the position of sun and moon. So the average height of the tide is 1 to 3 meters. Spring tide is known as high tide and neap tide is known as low tide. Now let's see about the timing of tide. When does it occur? As we discussed, it occurs twice in 24 hours. So how does it occur? The time difference between each tide is approximately 12 hours and 26 minutes. So 12 hours and 26 minutes. If there is a high tide at 8 a.m., the next high tide will be at 8 hours 26 p.m. That is 12 hours of difference, 12 hours and 26 minutes of difference. And the next tide will be 8 hours 52 a.m. and so on. It will be make a difference of 12 hours of 26 minutes, and it will be going on happening the timing of the tides. This occurs because of the revolution of the moon in the same direction of Earth's rotation, that is west to east. The revolution of the moon and the rotation of the earth is of approximately same speed. So due to that, and it is also rotating west to east. So the moon also is revolving west to east. If the moon had remained stationary, each place on the earth's surface would have come under its influence about 24 hours, and each tide would have occurred at the interval of 24 hours. If suppose the moon would have stationary, it would have not rotating or not revolving, the occurrence of tide would have been each 24 hours. The tidal range differs from sea to sea. In the open oceans such as Atlantic, tides flow and ebb regularly twice a day. In the enclosed sea and shelter areas such as Mediterranean or Baltic, the range may be very small. So it differs the sea to sea. The movement of the tide out to the sea and moving out from the land differs sea to sea. Now let's discuss about the effects of tides. What are the effects of tides? How they are beneficial or they are not beneficial. First point is the tides help to remove the debris from the sea shore. So tides, as it hits the shallow marginal sea or the coastlines, it removes the debris, the sediments. Strong tidal currents help ships to enter in shallow harbors. Example Kolkata, now it is Kolkata. So the strong tides help the ships to push close to the harbor. In certain harbors, tidal basins are constructed to store tidal water. An example you can see London Harbour. So in certain basins, the tidal basins are constructed to store tidal water so that the ships will be pushed towards the sea shore. Tidal energy can be harnessed, that is in France, to generate electricity. So tidal energy from the tide we can generate electricity. Example UK and Australia. Tides help in producing salt in the coastal area as water is collected, flooded by high tide in the low-lying areas. So the tides also help to collect the salt, as due to the flood by high tide they are accumulated nearby the seashore, the low-lying areas. Tides govern the schedule of fishermen. They sail out and in with the tide. So they sail out and in with the tide. So they know, the fishermen know that when is the high tide, when is the low tide. So according to that, they will be going for the fishing, or they will be going for the catching the fish. In cold countries, tides prevent the ports from getting frozen, as they keep coastal waters in the constant motion. So in the cold countries, mainly in UK or in European countries, what happens? The tides help the coastal areas to keep away from getting frozen, as these tides regularly move. They constantly move. The next point is that strong tidal waves, although prevent formation of delta, but they help rivers in building their own floodplains, Thames in England. So strong tidal waves or the tides also build the deltas. That is one example there, the river Thames in England. The sea creatures which are attached to rocks depend on tides to bring their food along with the tidal water. So the sea creatures which are attached to rocks depend on the tides. The tides help them to bring their food along the tide waters. So these were the few points that we discussed about the tides. Remember the definition of tides and the two types of tides, how the tides are being caused, the causes of tides and the effects of tides, the advantage and disadvantages of tides. Thank you so much for watching this video so patiently. Hope you would ask questions in WhatsApp and comment in YouTube. All the best. I remain.